Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ventures, a show where my guests and I get to explore market landscapes, entrepreneurial stories, problem spaces, and examine together how new products and services might be able to be built, either for-profit, nonprofit, or personal ventures to benefit humanity. Really, the purpose of the show is to educate and inspire a new generation of venture builders and investors to make the world a better place. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the founding story of a company that went from idea to exit in a matter of a few years. Patrick, the CEO, had an idea, went and found advisors and coaches. I had the honor of being one of those people. We helped him find a CTO, build their company, get into an accelerator, raise seed money, and ultimately exit. And so we also have the honor of having Brian on with us, Patrick's CTO, and the two of them talk about their story in detail that you don't often hear. So for example, if you've been following me for a while, I talk about the importance of worldview alignment in founders. And the reason why I talk about that is because conflict at the founder level, either direct or indirect conflict that results in communication breakdown, often will lead to operational inefficiency and the ultimate failure of a business. And so the way that Brian and Patrick came together and got very personal. In fact, in this episode, they get very personal with us. They share that they are men of faith and they talk about their Christian faith in a very open and direct way. And we can use this as an example that no matter what background you come from, whatever your religion, philosophy, or political ideology, etc., it's the way that you can find co-founders to work with so that you can derive your values that are going to set up your company for success is important. So we can use this conversation. I'm excited to share it with you because Brian and Patrick talk in detail about how you can do that for your business. So if you're watching this show, you can listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. Or if you're listening, you can watch this show by visiting wclittle.com. And there you'll see more extensive show notes and links to resources that we talk about today. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Patrick and Brian. All right, Brian, Patrick, welcome to the show.
Awesome.
Good to be here.
Glad to be here.
Really excited for this conversation. Patrick, would you mind starting by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I am a West Coast native. I've moved out of the Bay Area at the ripe young age of 4 years old, but I've been up in Seattle area as my hometown now. And I've been an entrepreneur and software sales guy, but now more of a product leader and a little bit of an investor too. You'll learn more about that later. So that's the real brief version. And I've got 4 kids, lovely wife, and I'm glad to be on the show. And Brian is my partner in crime, so I still call him my CTO.
Nice. Yeah, I'm Brian. I grew up in the Atlanta area, moved out to Seattle about 13 years ago. My career's been in software, so I was a software developer for a long time, then transitioned to a startup CTO with Patrick, and now an engineering leader at ServiceNow.
Awesome. So a lot of the people listening in, watching in, are entrepreneurs. They are budding entrepreneurs, or they've been entrepreneurs for a while, or they're investors, kind of curious to learn more about early stage investing and kind of what that looks like. So maybe let's talk a little bit about the story of VendorHawk. Brian and Patrick. Patrick, do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about just the origin story?
Yeah, sure. Fortunately, Will was a part of that origin story because of all the connections you had through code fellows and developers you knew. So yeah, I was at a software company selling software and helping the customers that I sold to not get auto-renewed. And I was realizing, I wonder if there's any solution that helps them actually track all the software that they have, all the other software, not just the one I was selling. And so I started, writing that idea down. I shot it over to Will and said, I think you know some software developers. Is this an idea that you could help me, think through with a developer? And Will jumped on and on board. And yeah, we immediately just jumped into this research, and really, you started introducing a framework to me, right? Where you said, "Hey, let's think about what is the overview and the problem statement." You helped me refine that, and immediately we started looking in the market. What's the competitive landscape look like? Is there any products that do this? And pretty quickly, it was clear there was really not a solution for this. And we even didn't quite know what the problem really was, to be honest. I think you remember, you're just like, subscriptions, lots of them. There's probably a problem there. But I remember we did a quick Google form, and we got quickly 20 people to just tell us and articulate what are the problems with having lots of software, just real basic, open-ended, because we didn't know which one mattered the most. So quickly we started to hone in on, is it a renewal issue problem? Is it a wasting money problem? And we got enough of those people interested that we kind of honed in on the actual problem. And very quickly, you're like, we need to introduce you to a CTO, and pretty quickly here, as we were just starting to kind of paint that into a product. So, yeah, and that's when I made a really, really short list. Again, non-technical guy here. I was, I could barely spell HTML as it is. But I would basically say to myself, man, in my network do I trust? As a follower of Jesus, I said to myself, I want to have someone that can build a business that also has those values and wants to follow and honor God with the way they run their business. And so I came up with a short list. And Will, you remember helping me with that, right? You said, here's some people you might think about.
Yep. Reaching out to some folks. Yeah, those were the days.
Yes. So that's when Brian enters in, and maybe Brian, I'll let you tell the story of the coffee shop at 6 a.m. I didn't know if you had stayed up all night, like most developers work late, or it was weird to see you at 6 a.m. I'm like, I'm trying to read this guy, but yeah, do you want to tell him how we met? Maybe in that?
Sure. Yeah. No, I was in my developer role, and I was looking for a new opportunity. And I'd always been drawn to entrepreneurial type projects, knew I wanted to be involved in startups in the future. And so I got this cold email from Patrick. We had a history before doing some cross-cultural work with Muslims. And so he reached out saying, hey, I've got this business idea. I'm looking for a technical co-founder. Let's meet. And so yeah, we met at 6 a.m. at a coffee shop. I had been used to this a little bit, but as a developer, 6 a.m. is still pretty early. But yeah, we met, and I was super impressed with Patrick's approach to the company. I could tell that one, he had strong leadership skills, which I was looking for, strong business skills, which I was looking for, a strong idea. And then he also pulled out a book that I was really passionate about, which was The Lean Startup. We were doing that. I was like, yes, this is going to be an approach that's going to work. So after that meeting, I was sold and ready to move forward.
Yeah. So that's how we kind of it got started there. But I mean, Will, you were still, we leaned on you and helped, with some of the early Prota crew. But I think the thing that was really important for us is, Brian, when you jumped in, we basically said, okay, here's the problem. How can we take these, we had 20 customers we'd done interviews for, and Will, you were very adamant. You're like, go selling the idea. And I'm like, don't you need a software product to sell? And the first things that you taught me was like, actually go and try to take the problem and turn that into a proposal for a solution. And so when you taught me about Balsamiq, I quickly jumped onto Balsamiq and realized, I could actually build software here on Balsamiq, these wireframes. Problem was I accidentally built about 1.5 or 2 years of roadmap in about like 3 or 4 days on Balsamiq. And I didn't realize it was a lot of work. But yeah, at the time we were doing this on the side of our day job. So we both still had day jobs. We were definitely hustling the evenings and early mornings. But yeah, I remember we built Balsamiq wireframes based off a couple hypotheses we had in our interviews. One of them was, is managing renewals a really difficult thing, And we said, if we think it's difficult, so here's one UI. Here's another one on maybe saving money is one. And very quickly, we actually got some feedback, and some people were excited about renewals. and actually paid us as early customers, and on the promise of, hey, your subscription will start in 4 months from now, I think we said, which is when it was like, all right, that's when you have to have real software. But we sold our first 2 contracts on wireframes alone, like not a line of code. And then quickly we started iterating. And, Brian, you can talk about how we shifted maybe away from renewals to the other stuff.
Sure. And one thing to note on that process with the wireframing is we're pretty intentional about writing down the hypotheses we're testing as we're going through this. I think some people can be confused about lean and how to approach it. And I think this piece of intentionally writing down what is the hypothesis I'm testing, how am I going to test this, that was something we did through this process. I think one example with the wireframes was there were kind of 2 angles we were looking at. One was that software evaluation that people are trying to sort through, or is it actually managing the software I already have? And so we created 2 different experiences related to those things and how people responded to those experiences. Yeah, from that process, from the wireframes, it was clear that managing software we already have is the problem to go after, both in terms of managing renewals and also in terms of how can I save money on I know I'm wasting money on this, how can I save money? So from there, we had some ideas of how can we quickly identify savings to speed up the sales process and get people excited about the product. So that's when we built very tiny MVP demos where we would integrate with an individual software product. They could hook it up in about 5 minutes and then see instant savings. So G Suite was the first one we did, and then we did Salesforce shortly after that. And once we had just that quick demo with some of these people, once they saw the number right away, it was really exciting and continued to drive momentum.
So maybe backing up a minute, I imagine a lot of entrepreneurs listening in are surprised and curious about how on earth you were able to sell actual contracts to people with wireframes. Can you explain a little bit more about how exactly you pulled that off? Because I remember there were some interesting strategies and tactics you went about during that process.
Yeah. I had some. Again, I come from enterprise sales background, also inside sales as well. So all of this is virtual, over Zoom and things like that. The key thing is creating this concept of an alpha group, right? So so we're not even beta, right? So alpha is, hey, here's this thing. I'm going to show you what it looks like. Click through the wireframes. But we had this thing called an alpha group agreement. And it was essentially a 1.5 page document that walked through some real basic, here's what you're going to do for me as an alpha group member. You're going to give me some feedback 2 or 3 times between when you sign and when we launch the MVP. Also, you're gonna give me feedback on the changes that you make. So every time we make changes, you need to give your time. But in exchange for them giving their feedback, they got a couple things. So one, from a sales perspective, they had to get their contract started, about 4 months from when they signed. They had to pay now, right? That's the important thing. They need to pay now and vote with their dollar that it actually makes sense. The contract, it was technically like a 16-month contract, but it starts, and then we could refund that money 100% up to 60 days after the start of the contract. So after the launch of the product. Right. So what I'm doing is I'm giving them no reason to say no. All they're doing is they're putting their money in my bank account for 6 months, and I'm not going to use that or pretend that it's mine until day 61. Right. So those were a couple of the things that we did. And that made it so that you're helping them feel like as part of the alpha group, you're actually influencing the creation of this product and potentially a whole new category. Remember, one of our customers, Brian, he was proud that he was like, no, I helped create this category.
Yes.
He was in the alpha group, right?
Yep.
And then over time, you switch from an alpha group after you switch later on into more of a private or public beta. But what that does is it sets people up with the expectation that this is really minimal. You're going to get to influence it. You're going to be able to get out, but they need to actually pay you up front. None of this like, oh, we're going to do a free pilot. We're going to pilot this thing for, a couple months and maybe they'll pay us. Maybe if you have to. But the thing that worked really well is presenting something in wireframes that was compelling enough at a price point that we think that they could buy. And we actually started ratcheting up our prices. I remember the first couple were so small. By the fourth one, I just doubled the price in my head and the customer still paid it. And I was like, oh, maybe I should have done that again. Maybe I should have quadrupled it. So those are just some examples of how you test out the price, but you make it irresistible. If it's really a problem and it's really going to solve their problem, what the wireframe you're showing them, and of course your CTO thinks he can build it or she can build it, right? They have to be able to build it in the 4-month window and then continue to iterate. But that's how we got that to work. So the alpha group contract, you get them to sign it, and then they're on the hook for a whole year, and then they would renew. So, yeah.
And I think one key point to highlight here is that the key hypothesis we're testing is that, is this problem painful enough that somebody will pay for it? And this is a real proof point. If they actually write you a check for your product, that's a great proof point that you're on the right track.
Before you even have a product.
Yes.
And so for those not familiar, what was the problem that you were solving? You mentioned asking a generic question about managing multiple SaaS subscriptions, but where did you settle into? Because a lot of people are very curious, like, how did you get somebody to pay money up front? What was the value proposition?
The first 2 customers bought on one value proposition, and then the second 2 bought on something different. I'll tell you about. So we had 4 customers buy before we launched. The first 2 bought on I have a giant list of software. I don't really know when any of them renew. And so it's really on credit cards, and this thing can just come up whenever, the either a monthly renewal, and then there's the annual renewal. And sometimes on an annual renewal, there's an auto renewal clause, like 60 days out, 90 days out sometimes. And so when you want to cancel it, you can't because you already by contract renewed. And so dealing with a surprise auto renewal was what got the first 2 customers. So like, oh, if you could just give me a renewal notification, let me get reminded before my auto renewal date, that'd be great. The second 2 customers bought on something based on savings, like with the G Suite and Salesforce. We showed them who wasn't logging in. They had licenses for Salesforce. And I think we found more than 100 licenses that were unused. That at $1,000 a pop annually, that we uncovered 6 figures of savings, and he paid less than $10,000 for our product, right? So that it was a no-brainer on utilization of SaaS licensing being the main value driver there. So those things combined is kind of the nucleus of the product that we went to market within the MVP. It was real basic, but it was high enough value to generate generate interest and ring the cash register.
And how did you even navigate your way into a decision maker at an enterprise who could make a decision to pay money for something like that? Because that's often a challenge, especially people who don't have a background in sales. What advice would you have for those type of people?
Yeah, I think the best thing I could share would be you have to think through all of the connections that you have and asking those connections if they know of somebody at their, most of those people probably work at a company, most of them. If they work at a company, someone in that company, this is for B2B software, somebody in that company probably would hopefully take an email from them. And that's where we got our first several. Is just referrals within companies. This is business to business software sales. The other thing is we did go ahead and look at some top tech companies. I think it was our 5th customer was actually my very first cold call. I felt like God was playing a joke on me because I'm like, all right, Lord, I'm going to go ahead and call some people. And I called the first person, VP of IT, picked up his phone, a number that I came in and I found him through the directory. So I had a general number, you find him in the directory. He answered his phone. I told him the 30-second, yeah, you probably have a lot of software you don't really know what you're doing with. And he's like, oh yeah, it's painful. I'm like, well, I don't have time to talk now, and neither do you, which is true if you cold call somebody. I don't have time to talk now, but maybe next week you have some time to talk. I could just grab 15, 20 minutes. I can see if you're wasting a bunch of money. He goes, sure. What day is good? And before I knew it, I did a cold call and got that first person. So just general number, find the name in the directory through the phone tree, and, pray that they pick up the phone. So those are a couple examples, Will, of how to do that.
So Brian, from your perspective, you have a CEO, a startup CEO out there hustling and selling. Yeah, he's writing checks that you're going to have to cash here at some point. What's going through your brain when you're thinking, I gotta get this thing built?
Oh man, yeah. So I think I sometimes frustrated Patrick, but I was in the MVP piece. I was always focusing on the M. What's truly minimal here?
Yeah.
So I was always finding ways. What can we whittle down in what we're selling that's still valuable, and still viable, but that I can actually do? Because I was the only person working on the product at this point, and we were moonlighting too, and we had families, so we only had a limited time to work on this. But honestly, it was an incredibly intense year for me. I was working nights, weekends, early mornings to get this MVP out the door. One thing we did do in the alpha group is we put some scope of the product in the contract, but we made it fudgeable. So it was more like high level feature descriptions and not like screenshots and the full on definition of our product, so that we could actually fudge a little bit on scope as we approach that 4-month deadline. That was helpful. Second is about 6 months in, I was starting to burn out a bit. And I remember a key call that we had with you, Will. We were considering bringing on some contract help and paying cash for it. But you coached us to, hey, see if you can find a co-founder who can come on as a developer with you. They'll be bought in. You won't have to pay cash. You can pay them in equity. And so later on in the process, we brought on a third co-founder who was a principal engineer for us. And that really helped take some of the pressure off of me and helped us accelerate the product.
Yeah, that's great. So Patrick, where did it go from there? The next steps of scaling the business. Where did the journey take you?
Yeah, before we kind of step too much further on the business side, I think it's really important to center in what helped ground us as founders, because it's so often you just get running and building a business and you're not intentional to think about how you want to run the business. And I give kudos to Brian on this. I started out with a basic working, I think we just called it a working agreement. And so we had the legal, like LLC operator agreement, which is like if things got really nasty, it's a legal document on how we had to work together as owners of the LLC. Mm-hmm. But there was also the working agreement to know, well, what's the expectation when I'm moonlighting? How much time do I work? When do you expect me to answer a text message? And after 10 o'clock at night, do you expect me to answer a text message? So you need to communicate and clarify what the expectations are. Because as the common saying goes, all frustration comes from unmet expectations. So you need to define, what am I expecting of you as my co-founder? The key thing after that was we also decided, and this is to Brian's credit, he kind of pumped the brakes on us in the early days and was like, look, I think we are not, I don't think we're honoring God with how we're running this company right now. And I was like, okay. Why? And people of faith were like, everything we do, and we should be honoring to God wherever we can. And so Brian just put forth some really great reminders, and we documented these down, and we started collaborating on defining how can we run a company in such a way that we felt like really brings glory to God, honors Jesus as the King of our hearts, our lives. And what that meant was we had some very clear definitions about, we're not gonna work ourselves into the ground as if everything's all on us. Like we're not gonna kill our families or our marriages. We're gonna check in on that. Also, we're not gonna skip days off and weekends and rest. That's important. So all these things, and even the point of why we're doing this to serve our customers. We want to build a team. We want to love our team, love the people on our team. So all the reasons for why started to really get in deep on this document. And I remember we took them and we said, okay, well, we want to be able to hire people from all backgrounds and beliefs who don't agree with us, and we want to have a diverse company at the same time. That's a big part of what we see as the heart of God is Jesus was very inclusive. He hung out with all sorts of people. So what we did is we took those that were more faith-based, I would say, kind of a manifesto. You can see this on, I think, my blog. I've got the Founders Manifesto. You can read the whole thing there at patrick.lowndes.com if you want to. There's the plug. But we translated those over into company values. So you don't have to agree with anything that we believe on the faith side of things. But what I did tell company employees when we started hiring was, hey, there are 2 documents that help us found this company. Really, they're actually both bestsellers. One of them is a bestseller of recent, The Lean Startup. Another one is the all-time worldwide global bestseller, the Bible. And we pulled the basically principles from those to come up with our values. And so you need to align with these company values, right? And so again, you don't have to agree with all the other stuff that's important to us as founders, but you do need to agree to these things. And that's one of the things that we paused and we did, Will, that it was actually the first thing that we would do on day 1 of orientation. We would sit down and walk through these values. And then eventually we added norms of behavior of how you should act, in light of this value. We can talk more about that, but I just wanted to pause before we went further in the story and say, without setting that up, you're going to probably run yourself, like where we were headed was burnout and probably not being friends and, no story to talk about.
Yeah, that's I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that over the past decade of coaching founders, I always start with the worldview and value alignment, right? People have different religions or philosophies or however they're approaching it, but it's extremely important, especially with your co-founder team, wherever you're deriving those values, that you get extremely clear about them. And it's okay if you're a person of faith, or it's okay to actually get very explicit about language in your faith amongst yourselves, and then do exactly what Patrick and Brian did, derive from the Bible, derive from Lean Startup, derive from whatever source you want. And from a legal perspective, that's totally fine as you're hiring people, as long as you're not discriminating in any form or another, that people should be aligning to these values. Every company has a vision and a mission and values. It's just some are hand waving and sort of nodding to it, and other founders are actually living it. And so the founders who are actually living it and start at that worldview level, those are the founders to pay it. For the investors listening in, those are the founders to be paying attention to.
Yeah, I think I would say that the consistent employee feedback we had about VendorHawk was that they loved the culture. And we had people from all backgrounds and completely different worldviews that worked at VendorHawk, but everybody loved working with the team, and they really appreciated the values that we had.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's nice to go to work and have it be a life-giving place, and those values come from matter. So kudos to you guys.
And you'll hear more on that as we, later we talk about the acquisition story. We really needed a place to actually have some grounding with all that craziness. But let me catch you up on what happened between the 3 founders and actually raising about $1.2 million of seed capital. Okay. So we got into Techstars Seattle, 2017 as a spring class. And getting into that, we actually got rejected. We asked the guy leading the program for investment. He said, no, not going to invest, but you want to join Techstars? And so then we really went into that application process. And if you don't know, you probably already know about Techstars if you're listening to this, but really great program. And in that 3-month period, we went from I think we had 6 customers when we came in. We came out with probably closer to 9 customers or so. So we got a few more customers. We really matured some more integrations in the product. But I think the best thing is we really figured out how to tell our story. Brian, what was that like for you, kind of coming through that too? You probably were witnessing me trying to play around with different narratives like every other day.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the big end part of the program is this big demo day where you deliver a very polished pitch to a group of investors in the audience. And the last month of the program is spent on refining that pitch, and that really helped us clarify what is our vision, how do we talk about our story, how do we talk about the future of VendorHawk, how do we talk about that this is a market worth going after. That we had a lot of great hustle and early traction and proof points with the early sales we had, but turning that into a narrative that is attractive to investors was something that Techstars really helped us with.
And the Seattle community. I mean, we had so many people step up and gave of their time, even every week during the 14-week program, to give us that feedback. So many great founders and other founders that have become investors and things like that. So we had great mentors in the Seattle system, really stepped up to the plate for us. And that's where we came out of the program. And it was about, let's see, I could probably do the math in my head. Yeah, it was about 70 days after the program, we closed our seed round. And so, but within that, there's a big, we had a lot of things going on. I was pretty much purely focused on a pipeline of investors. There's probably about 80, maybe 90 investors. And I was going down through getting yeses and getting a lot of nos. And the concept of soft circling the round, getting a lot of people committed, to everything except the terms, right? That's getting them behind you as a founder was key. And then at the very end, say, okay, these are the terms we're looking at. You can stay, you can go, that's fine. But we didn't lose one person for terms. Everyone that said I'm in was already behind us and the vision of the company. But when we got to that point to raise the round, we were also starting to raise or hire a couple other developers and employees. You remember that, Brian? That was an intense season. You brought on your first couple developers outside of the founders.
Yep. Yeah, we hired 2 more engineers. We started hiring people on the sales side as well. And Patrick, you were going without any salary during this period, so you were very motivated to close this round so you could feed your family.
Yeah. In fact, we just had our 3rd child 2 weeks before we closed the round. So, and there's nothing impressive about that for me. It's what's really impressive is my wife, who's not on this call, who probably should be a 4th square on this, telling the story from our perspective. But and even Brian's wife. I mean, absolutely. Our wives bared so much of the burden with our family and household duties. I mean, we try to split up our duties and make sure we're but during that time, they knew this was go or no go time right here. So, Brian would probably say the same thing, but yeah, our wives were crazy supportive. And that's how I was able to be like, here's my new baby. Let's keep closing investors. So yeah. It was
At what
hard.
point did you gentlemen quit your day jobs? That's a common question that people have, is when should they quit the day job? What was it like for the 2 of you?
Yeah, we were actually very seriously considering of quitting. I was going to quit about 4 months before I actually did. But Will, you were like, man, you really have to be ready, and you're going to start eating away at your runway, your cash flow, your personal runway, if you do this too early. And so I actually stayed on 4 months longer, helping my company. I was helping my company. Really, my company was helping me as well, just have my base of my day job. But for us, I think it was when the Techstars program came in, I was already just going to go out there and fundraise without the program. And I'm glad I did not, because Techstars added a ton of value in such a short period of time, including introductions to a ton of investors. So it was actually right before we went into the Techstars program. We had about a 3 or 4 week period where it was like, okay, no day job, and it's before the Techstars program. Mm-hmm. I remember I just took a big breath and I was like, okay, here's a new phase of life. And for me, I'm like, no salary. So I just need to hurry up and get through this program and raise some capital and start building the business for real.
And on my side, and for any technical co-founders out there, what I did to help was about halfway through the moonlighting period, I left my full-time salary day job and took on consulting. So I started contracting on a shorter amount of hours per week so I could focus and get flow working on VendorHawk more often. So it's 32 hours a week of consulting, and then I ratcheted it down to 24 hours a week a little bit later. And then once we got into the Techstars program, which included a small amount of funding, that's when we quit and went full time.
So there's a lot of good accelerators and a lot of bad accelerators out there. Maybe can you comment a little bit on what were the features of Techstars in particular that were appealing to you?
I mean, for us, the network that you bring of mentors and investors around the accelerator is probably the most important. So when Techstars said, look, we've got 1,200 mentors and investors connected to our Seattle network, we were like, all right, that's pretty impressive. So for me, it was that plus a really proven program. And they showed up with the mentors in the first week. So first or second week, I think it was, it's kind of a blur, but we had 50 mentor meetings in the period of about 4.5 days. So you can do the math. It was a ton of meetings every day, half hour, just like rapid fire. So that was, for me, a really deep bench of mentors was important.
Yeah, I think in particular, the managing director of Techstars Seattle he's great, and he's been committed to the Seattle and Pacific Northwest startup ecosystem for a long time, and so he was very invested in founders and helping, so that really helped as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you graduate from the program. 70 days later, you land your seed round. That's awesome and amazing, and a a goal that obviously a lot of people going through cohorts of accelerators have. Then what, right? Then the real work begins. You're seed funded. You're building your team. Where did you go from there?
Yeah. So we had just moved in a couple weeks into a co-working space, and we just started to kind of find out what is our new rhythm going to look like. We had a little 10 by 10 glass box of an office where we had eventually three people in there. It got pretty tight, but then everyone else in the kind of the open desks. And we very quickly started to figure out how can we now cash in on these promises of customer acquisition. We had some initial interest, but now we really have to, get our sales motion set up. And what I did is I found somebody on the sales side who I felt was good enough in selling, but also good enough in operations to help me figure out what is the right process to sell. I had sold using the Salesforce CRM, and I was new on the marketing side, and we had to pull together some basic sales resources. And I'm just sharing on kind of the sales and marketing side of the house, but very quickly, it was me training this sales rep and trying to figure out how both of us together can learn quickly and sell quickly. And so I would always, I'd be on the calls with him, and we were, two people can hear different things in a enterprise conversation, especially if you've got like a room full of people you're trying to demo to and hear feedback from. So that was some of the stuff we did on the sales and marketing side to make sure we had the right pool of leads. We could put them in a process and a system that we could track in Salesforce. And, we had HubSpot, and we were using Outreach at the time as well. And we also used Discover.org for data and leads. So we had made some investments with that seed capital, just put it to work. And I think that was a good idea. The thing that I regret, and I will tell this to figure out sooner, is we went probably 3 months or maybe 4 months, which in startup time is a long time. We went 3 or 4 months without an intentional marketing person on the top of the funnel. I thought as a sales guy, I think we can just kind of scrounge our way through this database. And we did. We were hustling, we were moving. But the problem is marketing actually takes time for it to work. And I didn't know that. So if you're hearing this and you're like, I got some money, the marketing play, you're not going to really see a return on that for at least 3, probably more like 6, and some people might even say 9 months, like to really start seeing stuff. And so we had probably 14, 15 months of runway with that round. And we wasted the first 3 months not doing marketing when we probably should have began our testing, A/B testing with our hypothesis testing And we started that later, but I would just say that's a regret that I had, is I would have done that sooner. And and as a CEO, you're absolutely responsible for closing every deal, especially if it's B2B. If you're B2C, that's probably another podcast I'm sure will put up here on how to get the revenue wheel turning there. But for B2B and enterprise, you have to be involved in all those deals. And so I don't know, Brian, what was going through your mind. You're probably like, we need to see, you need to ring that bell.
On my side, so Patrick and I both shared product responsibilities, so defining the product roadmap, and then I was responsible for building that product, engineering. One thing you need to do is architect your engineering process to change literally any day, and you also need to architect your process to maximize flow for your engineers, so that they're not distracted by meetings or anything else. So we had a weekly roadmap review meeting, but that would change every week and probably change every day based on what we were learning. Because at the stage, you're still learning about the market. And so I think some things that really helped us were just taking this posture of both service and listening as you're working through sales calls, getting a bunch of no's from people who don't want to take meetings, getting a bunch of no's from people who you talk to and demo and get further in the funnel, but they still say no for one reason or another. Really being intentional about listening to those customers and learning, and then turning that into product features was really important for us.
And so how did you build a sales team? Was it just you for a while, Patrick, or how did you go about that? Because that's another common question as well on the B2B software side.
Yeah, it kind of depends if you have sales experience or not. If you're listening to this podcast and you are technical in nature and you haven't really ever sold before, it's going to be really helpful to try to get someone to help you learn how to do things like build a pipeline and track it. And maybe to start that pipeline is in a Google Sheet, as simple as that. You don't have to go for software like right out of the gate, especially if you've got some time to prove that out. If you've got a little bit of experience in sales, or you think you're pretty good on your feet, and you do want to add some process to it, you can. But there's always the first question of, when do you hire your first sales rep? And if you as a founder can actually sell enough yourself. I was just coaching a business I was working with, and the guy's a great sales guy, and he's like, Patrick, I'm not sure when it's the right time. And I asked him, are you able to close all the leads you get? He's like, oh yeah, I've got that. And I'm like, there's your answer. Don't hire anybody. Because he just needed to hear the affirmation that at the current stage, if you can be closing the deals and manage that effectively, then that's great. However, you get the marketing person in there, if they're doing their job, you should have a good problem, which is, I have too many leads, I can't run them all. That's when very quickly you might consider getting somebody, again, the right mix. Again, a lot of debate on this, but the right mix I found was someone with a little bit more junior in their sales career, but still a lot of hustle, and they could probably fend for themselves and learn how to close a deal, right? So that person could be more of like your SDR, ADR, or people call it XDR now. So you could grab someone like that, have them shadow you on the calls where you're demoing the product. They're learning that very quickly. And that was our second sales hire, was actually an ADR, account development rep. And that person shadowed me and shadowed the account executive who was actually carrying the quota for sales. So the key thing is you got to get someone that you think's got that upward mobility and has the capability to be smooth and tell the story of the product, but not, you can't hire all these people without leads. That's not right. And I tried to do that, to say, look, we're just going to together go out there and find them, which was motivational, but it was green. And I'll admit, like, I probably wouldn't have done it the same way. I would have done more marketing and then slowly built the team around the fact that I have more than I can handle. So that's what I would say.
So in the growth and product, right? It's sort of the iteration between growth, product. from your perspective, Brian, how did you help Patrick think about that from an architectural and process standpoint? And what was going through your mind as you're sailing forward post seed here?
So the growth product trajectory is interesting. And honestly, from my perspective, I always felt like the product was lagging behind what we needed to grow the business. And I'm sure that's common among any technical growth founder. But what I wanted to do is see our team and myself and our team as partners to the sales and marketing team. Sometimes you as an engineer can get lost in architecture or in a certain product feature that doesn't really serve the needs of the business. So it was really important to me that anything we were working on was directly serving the business. So that might have been, we have existing customers who have needs. Customer success was incredibly important to us because we were approaching some renewals during this process. So we really wanted to make sure that features we were building were helping our customers succeed and that we would drive renewals for these customers. Because if you're going out and raising a Series A, you have to show that customers love your product and want to stay with you. So customer success was big, and we would build features for customer success. Other times we would build features to drive sales. So sometimes if it was a tough deal that Patrick was trying to close, we would promise developer time or new features as part of the deal, so that we could close the deal. But really, generally, I saw us as we exist to serve the business, and this is either helping sales, helping marketing, or helping customer success. And because you only have a very limited amount of bandwidth with a small engineering team, so you need to be really focused on serving those business goals.
So then what happened? Paul Graham has this famous essay, Don't Talk to Corp Dev, and it walks through the perils of all these large businesses that will come in and try to woo you and glean insights, and they'll just distract you from your mission. But at what point, and feel free to interject if there are other stories that should be told before we get to this point. But at what point did Corp Dev start knocking on your door?
Yeah. Well, what precedes, right? Well, actually, they knocked on our door 2 months after we closed our round. That's when we started getting some inbound interest. And at the time, it was the honest truth. Hey, we're busy building a big business. Like, don't want to talk to you. And I had read that, Paul Graham's article there, and said, yeah, not going to talk to you. And I did. I went back and kept building the business, and we got to this point when, in our board meetings, our board member was telling us, hey, look at your runway for 6 to 9 to 12 months from now. At what point are you gonna raise your next round? Because we were not profitable. We were burning cash like a lot of SaaS companies do. And when we had that long, hard look, it was probably only 6 months or maybe 5 months after we raised our round, we started thinking through that, wow, all the excitement of hiring these people and we're now cranking on all cylinders. Well, as a CEO, you're living 6 to 12 to 18 months in the future, trying to create the next leg of the journey while you're living in the current one. And that's challenging, right? Because you're like, I got to work through this pipeline. I got to sell these deals. I got to think about how the heck we're going to pay everybody 9 months from now. And I got to deal with that too. So we started to go down that path. And really going back to the Corp Dev comment, we started to realize, wisely from our board was telling us, you really got to take some of those conversations, and you as the founder need to use those to learn about the industry from these big players that have a lot more experience. They're hearing a lot more trends. They have data that you don't have. And so we were definitely very guarded. Like, we don't have a lot of time, time is of the essence, and we all, and I told people no, but I also time boxed meetings pretty tightly as well. And I would show up to those meetings with an agenda to ask them questions. So they wanted an hour, I would make half of the meeting about me asking them questions. And I remember one time I demoed our website They wanted to see a demo and I wasn't ready to show them. And I literally was like, yeah, so we have this, and I literally went through the website of the, screenshots, and they're like, oh, that wasn't very helpful for us. So I definitely played hard to get. And I have a 4-part blog series that you should read, again, detailing each step of this process. But we started taking meetings, and I would say only take meetings from people that you think there really could be a bigger picture, a better together story in the future with, and only give them a little bit, and then go back to building the business. The problem is when you have like a lot of meetings with a lot of people, now you're really distracted. And for us, we were simultaneously starting conversations about the next round with investors.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And so at this point, you're still scaling the business. What learnings did you have, Brian, from a CTO perspective with regard to just managing an engineering team and having to keep up with product and keep up with your sales and marketing?
Yeah, I think what was really important for us, a few things. One, I have a strong bias towards full stack engineers, and I think that was really helpful for us, because you don't need, if you separate between like front end engineers and back end engineers, now you need 2 people to get anything done. Whereas if you have full stack engineers, you have individuals who can execute a full feature end to end. So that helped us with speed, and velocity is so important at these early stages. Second is we set everything up with continuous delivery, so we could ship at will, and so we had an engineering process to support that with lots of automated tests and so on, and that really helps the business, because customers like, hey, there's this gap in the product. For example, we had a way to invite users to the product, but you couldn't include a message with that invitation. Some very basic feature, but we just didn't do it because we were focusing on other things.
Sure.
So they gave us that feedback, and then 1 or 2 days later, we're like, hey, here you go, here's the feature. And that those little things that we did that a lot with a lot of customers, and just being able to listen and respond really helped drive love for the product and love for our team, which created some customers that were true advocates for us.
Mm-hmm. But with a secret weapon like that, you cannot, from a sales perspective, sell always on features that you don't have. You can't do that.
Yes, yep.
So with that secret weapon, you would be deep in a negotiation. They think like, yes, there's the value, and sometimes there's just a couple sticking points. So like, I'm really not going to buy. And then there's the test. Again, lean startup, you're always testing. So then you test with, you mentioned there's 4 things that you need. If you had to pick one of them, and you could only have one that was the most important, which one would it be? Okay, well, it's number 3. Okay, so number 3 is the one you want. What if we had that one, and then you kind of 60 days from now, 90 days from now, and now you're testing, how urgent is it? Well, we could do 90 days. That's easy. We could have it in 3 days, but we're gonna sign up for 90 days. So you see how you also need to use the sales process to help gauge priority and let them tell you and continue to tell you the stack rank, because that's what one customer says, but customer over here might think number 1 is actually the most important. So that's a whole nother podcast on prioritization. But
I think another learning for me on the personal front, just as a CTO, is something, and as a developer, individual contributing developer as my background, is one area I had to learn was, as a CTO, I'm not just like lead developer, and I'm not just building software. There's a million other things that I need to worry about and build at the company. One of those in particular for us, given we were B2B sales, was around security. And anytime you're talking with a corporate team about buying your software, you have to have a strong security position. You have to have materials that help the sales team. Again, I'm a partner of the business, to close the deal. So I would say 15 to 25% of my job was creating an information security policy, creating different documents that architecture and our integrations and why they're secure and why you can trust us, and so on. So as a CTO, you're going to start out as the builder, but as the company grows, you're going to be taking a step back from from building individual features towards architecting the team and the process, and also some of the other technical areas of the business, like information security and overall architecture and privacy and so on.
Yep. Now let me and by the way, part of that time you just mentioned was answering all the security reviews. Remember those 200 questions in Excel you had to fill out?
Yes.
So, but what I will say is we can jump forward now. What happened with those Corp Dev conversations? How did we decide to raise money? Did we not? So I'll give you the teaser for it, but you really need to go just read through some of those articles that really walk you through. It's written to other founders to help you. If you're ever thinking about how do I scale my business, is acquisition a possible? So they're all called getting acquired. But the thing I want to share is we started getting into, we decided there was one company that was very clear. They were incredibly close to our industry. They were actually leaders of the current industry. And we said, we're just going to spend, I'm just going to spend and go deep on meetings with them. And I did that. And meanwhile, I had an intro meeting here. I said, yeah, nice intro, but I'm busy. Nice intro, but I'm busy. Right? So just playing hard to get. 5-6 meetings in, I realized we're getting pretty close to a potential acquisition. The conversation went from, oh yeah, better together to, yeah, what would it look like if our technology was in your company or in your platform or your product? And when you start turning the corner on where you're headed and, what are we going to need to make that interesting to us? Again, I'm too busy. I'm building product. I'm the one that has the special goods, not you. That's why you're coming to me. So you have to make sure the power dynamic is still in your favor to some extent. But then quickly we went and realized, gosh, we really need to bring everyone to the table and give this an honest look. Because the Series A conversations or the Series C extension for a lot of you, I'm sure that's right where we were. We're like, I'm not going to get a great A, so let's consider that route. We were still getting you need to have more revenue. And over on the other side, these other conversations in Corp Dev, they were heating up too. People were talking about, we had a verbal offer to do a letter of intent. And so immediately I said, okay, who can help me with this? Found a deal guy who was really good, helped me pull together those initial meetings and got second and third and fourth meetings. And, I don't know what I was like to work with at that stage, Brian, but in the course of about 4 weeks, I had tons of meetings and a couple of them dropped off and we weeded them out. But then there were a few of them that really tried to step up, and ultimately 2 bidders went back and forth to try to get, our interest. And that's when, our deal guy really helped us secure the right partner for us. And that partner was ServiceNow, which is now the next leg of the story after that. So all the while I had to start communicating we had a signed offer for our company. Now we had to try to keep it quiet for the diligence period. This was super hard. But the short story of it was we didn't tell most of our employees. We had to tell some sales reps to stop selling. And they're like, what do you mean stop selling? I'm here to sell. So we had to figure out how to make this all work. But that was part of our agreement. We were going to eventually let our product be sunsetted, and we would actually re-platform and build our product with ServiceNow. So we actually eventually told the whole team about 2 weeks before the deal closed. And so we had to tell people, this is why we've been flying everywhere. This is why we've had some strangers visiting. But the way you manage that is these are partners. These are all potential partners. Oh yeah, here's ServiceNow. They just flew into town to explore a partnership with us. And so it's all under the banner of partnerships. And so as the CEO and the founders, the CTO, you're managing the expectations of your team. And then very quickly it turned into, what's going to happen to us? What about my job? And it gets very personal very fast. So we had to manage, making sure everybody felt like, hey, no, you're going to have a place, where we're headed. And we actually couldn't even tell them which company it was until the actual announcement day. And so they knew it was one of a few because they had a few people visit. So I share that to say it was really intense. And Brian, I don't know if you want to share about our early morning meetings where we get together as founders and just be like, we're praying for help because we didn't know what to do a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the most intense month or two, going through the last stages of the acquisition process, because we had our day jobs of still running the business, and like the most of the team thinks we're still trying to build the business, but then we had this side gig of all these meetings, and you go super in depth with these meetings, and then also just negotiations and so on. So it was like 2 full-time jobs going on at the same time. So we were kind of just at the end of our rope. So lots of time spent the founding team in prayer and just kind of making sure everybody's okay as we're navigating through this intense time.
And that's often a source of just tremendous, I mean, I've seen it time and time again, tremendous conflict inside a team when an acquisition is in process, the founders are flying out everywhere, rumors are flying. Coming back to the values that you set as a company, how did that go down? I mean, I imagine it wasn't super easy, but the actual process of announcement and transitioning into ServiceNow, can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of stories that I hear, and Brian, you probably heard too. Will, you definitely heard some of these where the acquisition happens and the product never actually gets used at the acquiring company, and the people just get put on separate things, and so that's a bad outcome. It sounds like for a lot of people. For us, and with ServiceNow, we had a really good experience because we really talked about what was going to happen during diligence, even before the offer came through. So even before, we're like, yeah, that's nice, you can talk about an LOI, but like, what do you think what is this going to look like together? Like, if for us to even get excited about this, tell us what the future is going to look like. And so we had a pretty good understanding of exactly what was going to happen. We're going to have to rebuild our software onto the ServiceNow platform. And so for us, the values of trying to celebrate together on the day of, there was a whole lot of angst. A couple people had really, maybe not severe, but really, really hard time accepting, this change, especially we had to move offices. So I think the values of really just loving people, the founders' values, that manifesto that we had come up with, really guided us in making sure, how are we caring for and loving our employees through this time? And not just the employee, sometimes there's questions and concerns that their spouse has, or their significant other. How can we help them and manage this with their own home life? And so I think just caring for people and also going for bat. I mean, Brian, you also went pretty hard to bat to make sure that everything was equitable, on the compensation side too. So.
Yeah, and one thing, when we did tell the team 2 weeks before it closed, we wanted to be as transparent as we could, and also allay any of the fears as much as we could. So the thing we told them was, we're getting acquired, you all have jobs, and you don't have to move. So that, I think that helped relieve some of the tensions. And then we also strategized about how are we going to talk about this going forward between now and when it closes. And we referred to it as the May plans. So whenever we had to, because we were in an open space with lots of other companies around, we had to keep things kind of quiet. So anytime we had to do something because of the acquisition, we would say, because of the May plans, we need to X or Y. So I think that helped navigate the team.
Yeah. Yeah. And then after the acquisition, I can share this, Will, is probably where you're headed with that. The acquisition landed, the ServiceNow team flew in, a couple key people flew in and like, hey, here's your new, leaders and bosses and folks. But then about 2 or 3 weeks after, so we had to switch offices, but we threw a really big and probably, pretty lavish, I would say, celebration dinner for the whole thing. So one of our values was hey, we have a lot of reasons to celebrate. God's done a whole lot for us personally, spiritually. And so we're just going to throw a big party. And we did. We spent a bunch of money building up a nice big party, invited the families of all of the employees, even some consultants that we worked with, and then all of the investors. We had a bunch of investors, and some of them even flew in to celebrate with us. So celebrating the win was big. And then, after that, it was a lot of just readjusting. Brian and I making sure people would adjust to this new environment in ServiceNow. And to kind of round out the whole part of the story that I'll share, and Brian, you can share your thoughts on it too, is that, 2.5 years later, 8 out of 10 of our original team is still with us at ServiceNow. It's a testament to ServiceNow, but I think it also relates to we still try to hold to our startup values and innovate, and we challenge ServiceNow in ways, and they know that, and they love us for it. And sometimes we're like, that's just your startup thinking, and it's not going to work here, and that's okay. But there's things that we're also learning and growing too. So maintaining the growth mindset, we're not getting excited about shipping, 3 times a week. Now we're excited that we just sold, a home, a well-known home brand. And now the company that that you drive your car, they're actually benefiting from the work of the integrations that you've done. So now we're dealing with huge customers. So we've just had to shift what we get excited about in the enterprise. And that was the last part I would share, but at this point.
So what we'll do is I'm going to collect questions from people who watch and listen to this episode. And I think we'll come back and let's do an AMA style follow-up to this, because I know there's lots of details and lots of interesting parts of this journey that people are going to have questions about. So we'll do that. So before we go, any final comments, and where can people learn more and find out more about the two of you?
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, final comment for me. I'm happy to, if there's anyone out there who's in a similar spot to I was when I was starting VendorHawk and wants to chat, I'd be happy to chat and help. You can reach me just at brian.geihsler@gmail.com, and we can go from there.
That's great. Yep, and I'm at patrick.lowndes@gmail.com, so pretty easy to find there. And then I just, like I've alluded to, I've got some blogs that I've posted because the questions come up a lot. So you can start there at patrick.lowndes.com and check it out on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, I love helping too. So together we have a good time with it. So it's been fun getting to share the story with the audience here, and hopefully everyone's been challenged or encouraged in some way. And it's definitely possible to run a business where you're not insane and you're not being in the throes of, in the throes of emotional and mental disorder. And there's so much of that today. So I just want to encourage you. It's possible. You need some grounding, and you need people around you. And it's, and hopefully this episode is a little drop of encouragement toward that end.
Appreciate it, gentlemen. I'll make sure to put links and information that you just shared in the show notes. Really appreciate your time, and I will look forward to part 2. Thank you. All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number 1, I have a general newsletter where I write about health science, emerging technology, software development, startups, and a variety of different topics that we talk about on this show. So you can visit wclittle.com and hit the subscribe button, or you can actually subscribe to specific topics that you care about most. Number 2, I have a portfolio company with my partners and I at Prota Ventures called Startup Rocket. If you visit startuprocket.com, there, if you are spinning up a new venture, you can receive customized coaching for your business model and the vertical that you're tackling. And it's a place for you and your teammates and your advisors and your investors to be all on the same page to make sure that you're not missing anything as you go about the important entrepreneurial work that you're about to get yourself into, or that you have been into for quite some time. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're watching, you can listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. And if you're listening, you can visit wclittle.com to view the episodes and check out the show notes for following up in more detail for any of the topics that we talked about. And if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you watch or listen to this show, that would be super helpful, help get the word out, and helps other people consume and interact with this content. Thank you.